Hi, everyone. Welcome to APQC's webinar, sponsored by Esker, Inc., on digital order strategy, hacks for insulating your business against disruption. I'm Marisa Brown. Thank you for joining us today. And I am the Senior Principal Research Lead for Supply Chain Management at APQC. I look forward to sharing insights and data from some of our most recent research. And my colleague, Nick Carpenter from Esker, will also be adding additional insights and real-world examples. I'd like to ask Nick to briefly introduce himself. Nick?
Hey, Marisa, thanks a ton for having us. My name is Nick Carpenter, been with Esker about 6 years, and fortunate to have had the privilege to work with a lot of manufacturing distribution companies as they're looking to transform their order management process and really how they're doing customer care today. So that's the experience that we'll be chatting about today. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, Nick. So just to kind of go through what we're going to cover in our webinar today, we're going to start by examining the context and considering all the disruptions that have happened to supply chain and order management over the last few years. Then we'll look at setting the strategic direction and evaluate the 2022 supply chain and order management priorities that organizations have shared with us. Next, we're going to talk about executing the plan in terms of automating order to cash and the order management process and improving visibility. And then Nick's going to put all this into action for us with a client case study, sharing some real world examples and lessons learned. And we're definitely going to have time for questions and answers at the end. So please be sure to use the Q&A tool in your Zoom interface. And you can also put some conversational things in the chat as well. We'll be taking a look at that throughout the webinar. So with that, let me advance us. Here we go. So we're going to start with the context. And unless you weren't with us around the last 2 years, I'm sure you've noticed that there have been some major disruptions, unprecedented disruptions since 2020 in supply chain, largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen extensive media coverage of supply chain, and the reality is that all of this coverage has made the general public a little more aware of what supply chains are more than ever before. But what we want to look at is how supply chains and therefore customer orders are disrupted. And we've seen all these disruptions really lead to an increase in customer inquiries. Hey, where's my stuff? And as you may or may not be aware, supply chains have been facing congested ports, tied up railways where sometimes trains have been broken into while waiting to unload. We can't forget the massive ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. There's an ongoing shortage of truck drivers. We've seen extreme weather, right? There was a freeze in Texas last February that was unprecedented. We've also been dealing with infrastructure collapse for some bridges and tunnels and more. So really what we wanted to understand is let's get some scale around this and understand how big of an impact all of these disruptions have had on people. So APQC did a poll earlier this year. And we took into account both supply chain professionals or supply chain pros, and also people who don't work in supply chain. We call those the average Joes, the average Janes and Joes. And we asked them to rate their familiarity with supply chains and just to evaluate the impact that they've experienced. So for both groups, not surprisingly, we see that there has been an increase in familiarity with supply chains and some of the impact on their orders as customers over time. Today, only 15% of the average Joes said that they have not heard of supply chain, compared with almost a third 5 years ago. And we see a similar drop in the number who say, I've only heard about it on the news, but it doesn't mean anything to me personally. And where we've seen a big increase in those who are saying, I understand what supply chains are, how they work, and why they're important. And of course, this is in layperson's terms, because as supply chain professionals and order management professionals, you know that there's a very complex operating model under the surface that many consumers are only aware of when their orders don't arrive. So one of the things that we thought was interesting is you might think, oh, we've all been through these last 2-3 years. We've all gone through the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. We all have the same experience. But in reality, what we found is that there's not been one unified experience with all these disruptions. So for about half of folks, regardless of whether they're a supply chain pro or an average Joe, they've been experiencing multiple ongoing disruptions. But we still have about a third of people who are like, it's only been some minor disruptions and overall life is normal. So all I can say is, Nick, I wish I could sign up for the life is normal experience.
Me too.
Wouldn't that be something? But when we look at the results, what we see from whether it's been just a few disruptions that people have faced or multiple ongoing disruptions, there are 5 common impacts that have really made a difference for folks, and especially in this past year. And one of the biggest things we're seeing is all these disruptions are leading to customers having to pay more as prices have gone up, wait longer as order times have stretched out, deal with imperfect orders. Maybe they arrived damaged or incomplete or only partially, or maybe in some cases they're being canceled and substitutions sent instead, or the dreaded stockouts. Right now in the United States, there's a baby formula shortage that people are scrambling to deal with. So feel free to tell us your experience in the chat where you've seen some of these disruptions impacting your life. Are you dealing with the empty shelves syndrome? Or what kind of staffing shortages are causing grief in your world? And that's one of the big problems we're seeing as a side effect of manual processes that have been disrupted when people are out sick and the process requires people to complete it. Work's just not happening. So if we're all feeling this pain, we want to understand what's causing this pain. So we delved into 11 potential causes of all these disruptions that we've been seeing. And for each cause, we had our research participants tell us whether it was a large, moderate, or small reason for some of these disruptions. And here are the top 5 based on the large impacts that we're seeing. And it's interesting to note that people issues top the list and transportation issues are in number 5. Historically, when people think of supply chain and even order management, they think of the transportation side, but there's people challenges here. And when we talk about labor shortages, the number 1 cause that people are facing, it's not just employees out sick. It's also a lack of skilled talent, strikes in some industries in some countries, but also globally, we're seeing employee resignations. Right? I think it's been called the big quit or the great resignation. People are suddenly realizing they don't want to work where they're working and they're leaving. And that can cause a huge knowledge gap if the process knowledge was all resonant in their heads as opposed to documented or automated in some way. In fact, for those of you who are in the United States, have you tried to fly on an airline lately? Over Memorial Day weekend, we had massive flight delays and cancellations, and a lot of it was tied to staffing shortages, which could be traced in large part to the pandemic, but there's other causes at work. So it's not just the people labor shortages though that we're dealing with. There's public health concerns, and we can't overlook COVID, right? That's the giant elephant that's going to be living with us for many years, unfortunately, but we still have influenza, Ebola, depending where you are in the world, there are other public health issues that are popping up. But then we've got governmental regulations that play a part. So we may have had a global pandemic from a virus perspective, but then we had lockdowns that came into play as a result of that. Trade restrictions, tariffs, all kinds of things that are impacting our ability to deliver customer orders in a timely manner. Product availability. Some of this is related to some of the spikes in unpredictable demand. Organizations are scrambling to do a better job on forecasting so that they don't oversell or undersell themselves. And then we see shortages in different areas, different raw material shortages that some very experienced leaders that I've spoken with have said they've never seen anything like this in the 20 or 30 years they've been involved in the industry. And then come the transportation issues, the congested ports, the shortages of containers, the shortages of vehicles that are needed for different things. So all this taken together, I mean, Nick, it's not a very pretty picture out there, is it?
Not at all. And I think this is a great chance to share a real world story from somebody that's dealing with these challenges. And I'm thinking of they're an OEM distributor of medical equipment, a company by the name of Skytron up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we were talking with their director of operations. He's not only heading up the supply chain efforts, but customer service rolls up under him. Everything from warehousing, customer service, think everything order fulfillment related. And there's a really good podcast out there on the Esker podcast that digs a little bit deeper into this. But what he said is that their shipping lanes or their transit times overall to get product from where it's OEM manufactured from the mothership in Japan over to the US kind of distribution arm was up 3x. And the kicker was it wasn't predictably up 3x, meaning most of the time it took 3 times longer. Boats were getting stuck at the port. They weren't getting offloaded. They weren't actually getting into the country. Once they actually made it by rail to Chicago for that last kind of leg of the transit, they were dealing with trucker shortages. And then other times it would just flow through very quickly. And he had not only challenges on the times where product wasn't getting there on time, but he had challenges when the product was there on time because it was so unpredictable that they didn't have the warehouse space in order to actually warehouse these products because they weren't expecting to get them until three times longer than they expected. All of that led to really very low resilience in their supply chain, in the ability to take on any disruptions that they saw in any leg of the journey when it came to actually being able to fill customer orders.
Wow. Yeah, that unpredictability is part of what we can no longer really forecast the future based on the past, because it's just become such an interesting game we're playing here. And one of the things that really compounds all of this is communication, or poor communication, the lack of communication. And what we asked organizations in the past 12 months, have you heard from your suppliers about disruptions that they're facing in their supply chain? So the good news is almost 2/3 said yes, they've heard more than once. About 14% had heard one time from their suppliers, but almost a quarter didn't hear anything from their suppliers about disruptions the suppliers were facing. And the problem with that, or the challenge with that, is then if you don't know that there's a disruption coming your way, you can't then implement alternate plans yourself to head that off or to mitigate the effect. And so really one of our hacks we would suggest is more communication to really enhance collaboration and ultimately satisfaction and your ability to get your customers their orders in a timely manner. You need to be communicating up and down your supply chain to make sure that any disruptions you can then, we've seen companies talking about like plan B, but they've also got plan C, plan D, plan E. We've kind of gone through the alphabet now, thanks to all these disruptions, in figuring out different scenarios and alternate plans and routes that can be implemented.
You definitely hear that a lot, Marisa, with companies trying to give their customers the self-service tools that they need because it's changing so frequently. By the time they get an order confirmation, before they get that advanced shipping notice, a lot has changed and a long duration may have gone on. And customers want that ability, that visibility for that Amazon-like experience to where their order's at in transit.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And when we ask people, like, how worried are you about this whole thing? How concerned are you about the future of global supply chains? What you see on the left side of the screen is that pretty much everyone is concerned to some extent. 39% are moderately concerned, 28% extremely concerned. And those percentages are higher among our supply chain pros, but even the average Joes are worried because they're feeling the impact, whether it's, just a minor impact, or if they're in that group that's having multiple ongoing impacts. There's a challenge here. And one of the quotes that I heard during the pandemic that I thought was just very right on is that supply chains are like elevators. When they work, no one thinks about them. But when they're broken, everyone notices and complains. So that's really what we're looking at with supply chains. We went from being behind the scenes and consumers and customers not really thinking about the order management process that went on behind the scenes as long as their orders were arriving as expected, to now a situation where things are all disrupted. So let's shift gears a little bit now and start looking at how organizations have set their strategic directions for 2022 based on knowing what's been happening out there. How do all these external factors impact organizations' priorities, especially for order management. So annually, APQC does a global survey of supply chain priorities and challenges for the coming year. And coming into 2022, what we saw was that supply chain planning remained in the top spot overall within supply chain as the highest priority for this year. That doesn't surprise anyone with the need to build resilience and better match supply and demand. That's not a surprise. Tied for second place, we saw a three-way tie this time with sourcing and procurement, logistics and inventory management, and innovation. And innovation jumped up there because companies are recognizing that they need to do things differently, and they need to do different things to change the results we're getting. But I want to point out that 75%, 3/4 of our respondents, of the 261 participants in this research, said that they are focusing on order management this year in terms of investing resources, hiring, and even innovation. So then within order management, we asked them, what are you looking to accomplish? And the biggest priority we see, 71% of them said it's automation and digitization. And this is, they're trying to really improve order cycle time while reducing errors that come up from manual interventions and improve their customer service. So going digital in this area helps with when there is a disruption, you can increase the transparency in your customers, and even others in the organization can be more rapidly aware of what's happened. It also can help organizations prioritize specific orders. If you can't serve everyone immediately the way you'd like to, how does the organization do that triage? And that's where automation can help. And also it can help with reducing any reshipping or inventory problems in a time when that may be a very tight part of the organization.
You know, Marisa, I think we see a lot of companies with some of the challenges that they have related to order management. I mean, the things that we hear people say are operational costs are through the roof because we're trying to bring in new people, train them up. It takes them 6-9 months in order to actually get proficient in our SAP, Oracle, et cetera, order management system. And with the disruptions of supply chain, they're spending more time on updating ship dates based on material availability. They're actually trying to play favorites on which orders might actually get filled based on a customer's strategic importance. They've only got so much precious inventory. Where do we allocate that across our customers? So I think those are some of the common kind of horror stories that we've heard popping up specifically related to order management.
Yeah, it can be hard. You're so busy fighting fires sometimes that you can't get back to the business as normal. And I think we've kind of all learned to remove that word normal from our vocabulary, because going forward, there may not be a new or a next normal. It may all just remain a little bit abnormal. So we asked folks within order management what their priorities were this year. And we see there's like a fairly even split in the top 5 things they're really looking to do. And I see a comment that somebody posted, is this individuals or companies? So these are individuals responding on behalf of their companies. These are supply chain professionals who are responsible for these areas within their enterprises. But we see a focus on finding the best practices. People are really looking for what works and trying to adapt that. Implementing new technologies and capabilities, standardizing processes. And this is something that is such a necessary prerequisite for automation. Evaluating, comparing performance through benchmarking. Everybody wants to know, are my competitors as sucky as I am right now? I mean, to put it bluntly. There's a lot of that. And then the focus on shortening cycle time. Because as you mentioned, our customers have been trained in their personal lives through Amazon and their consumer experience with getting orders quickly. And so now they really want to focus on bringing that kind of experience to their business life. And that can put a lot of pressure on our companies to get cycle times down.
Yeah, the one that jumps out here, standardizing processes. I mean, especially with a lot of companies that have grown through M&A, maybe over the years, they might have multiple ERP systems. There's many ways standard order management is done. And we hear the term kind of global template. What's our global template for how order management should be handled? What are some of those global policies and procedures that we can put in place in order to standardize how things are done to make it easier to do it, but as well as just kind of across the board. So I think that's one that jumps out. I think the other thing is that people are saying we need to reduce the number of systems that we're living in. We've got silos across, one system. If I'm a customer service rep, I'm playing air traffic controller. I've got monitor here, 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 and I'm trying to get data from all of these different points. I think that's another big one, is that standardization of systems as well.
Yes, agree. And then hopefully that would free up some of that busy work to let your folks focus on the relationship building and also the cognitively demanding work, that deep work that really can add value to your customers.
Great point.
So now let's take a look at kind of executing this plan, right? So how do you automate order to cash? And I include the whole order to cash and not just order management to some of the points we've been making, that it's all part of the experience from a customer's perspective. And then how do you improve that visibility as well? So I'm going to shift gears to another research project that we just wrapped up. And I will say I've seen some questions where folks are asking about the research. Everyone who gets a copy of this presentation, which is everyone who's registered for the webinar, in there I have links to the reports that have information on the demographics of all of our participants. So in this project, we looked at order to cash and how do you manage for success in disruptive times. And we found a number of performance drivers, and I'm going to share just a few of these insights that we got from the 177 global participants we had. So one of the biggest things has to do with your underlying master data, right? I've heard the expression that data is the new oil. It is that which lubricates our companies and keeps things flowing. And when you talk about order management and order to cash, those processes are only as effective as the underlying data. And when we talk about master data, just sort of definitionally, what we mean is the set of identifiers and extended attributes that describe a specific customer or a supplier or a product. It also includes data hierarchies and charts of accounts. So kind of technical there, but the key thing is that data should flow consistently across systems, from sales to order to invoicing. And that's where companies can really gain efficiency. And one of the things is we found that only about half, 49% of the organizations in our research have that data synchronized to where it does flow seamlessly across systems. Or even better is when you can reduce the number of different systems and handoffs that have to happen along the way. We found most of the organizations, or about half of them, have issues with their data either not being consistent or effectively curated and maintained. And that's one of the biggest things when it comes to master data. I've heard of companies, to undertaking a massive scrub and really investing time and effort in cleaning it all up so that you don't have a company name spelled 3 different ways in your database. But the thing is, it can't be a one and done process. It has to be an ongoing thing where you've got business rules around your data management and ownership for it, because otherwise the next order that comes in could come in and be entered in a dirty way and you're back to having messy data. So high quality data, especially about your customers, can enable you to do some deep analytics on who your customers are and further some meaningful automation so that you are automating the right things in the right ways. And wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about having a maturity scale. But what we see is that the word automation can mean many things to many people, many different things. So we wanted to understand the actual usage of different tools within a company's automation arsenal when it comes to order management and order to cash. So we saw that more than 1/3 of our respondents are only using simple or no automations in order to cash today. And that was very surprising. Very surprising. When you consider what customers expect in terms of rapid and seamless buying experiences and the availability of all these process automation tools that are out there, we really hope that those organizations step up their game a little and move up this maturity scale. And when we see the largest chunk of companies are using robotic process automation, or RPA, for their order management and order to cash. And then where we see a competitive differentiation is moving up to using machine learning or artificial intelligence for that. And that really helps increase efficiency and speed and higher quality analytics. And that's really where, today, not everyone is doing that. But if we had to say, what do you need to do to insulate your organization from disruption? This is one of the areas where you don't want to risk being left behind.
And I think that, the companies that are leveraging the AI and machine learning, it's like, beyond the buzzword, what does that mean? I mean, I think they're getting richer data on and more accurate data on demand planning. They're able to predict some of the inefficiencies a little bit better, and they're able to compensate for some of the nuances of their business. You know what I mean? I think we're talking about simple automation, things, especially when dealing with customers and customer orders. It's hard to have everybody do everything the same. You know what I mean? And you need that flexibility of smart technology to help kind of fill in the gaps that you can't force your customers how they want to, how you would like them to have it done.
Right, that is very true. So we look to see where different technologies are most commonly being used. And one of the things we see is that order management and then these sales, configure, price, and quote processes tend to have priority when it comes to robotic process automation and machine learning. And then we saw those least used in invoice and cash collection processes, despite the significant benefits that could occur for predicting which invoices might be problematic, or even automating invoice reminders through the use of a smart robotic process automation. So it's interesting. One of the key lessons that we learned, though, is we did some in-depth interviews with companies that are very sophisticated in their automation journey, and they learned some important lessons along the way. And one of them, this quote that's on the slide, AI gives information and capability to the practitioner to do their own work, but it must be part of the normal experience of their workflow. You can save even more time by empowering employees to make faster decisions and handle tasks without trade-offs. But the key piece is this part of their workflow. So we have a case study on IBM and how they handled their quote to cash process. And one of the things is they built this very cool AI-enabled tool, but it wasn't part of employees' everyday workflow. And it was a separate thing they had to go to and come back from, and they weren't using it. So once they realized they needed to build this into their daily workflow and the tools they were using to do their job, they saw the value increase tremendously. So that's an important piece of it, that you can't just build things and think people will come to them. It has to be seamlessly integrated with your business processes. And when I was talking with Nick the other day, I think I said, when it comes to things like robotic process automation, just because you have a hammer, not everything is a nail. And so, you can't go around banging everything with your RPA hammer when it's not the right fit.
Made such a great point. You hit the nail on the head. And the reality is that every, no pun intended, the reality is that almost every Fortune 500 company seems to have a major RPA initiative in order to automate the tedious, busy work that they can, right? Great. A lot of people are having a lot of success with it. I think where companies are using AI and machine learning is for those more complex end-to-end processes. So when we're talking about order management from, the point of reception, validation, entry, archive, customer communication to close out the loop, the number of bots that you'd need for something like that is not necessarily complex or too complex to handle, So I think that's where we're seeing folks use machine learning and AI is more on the end-to-end process. RPA, great for solving those point solutions for things like releasing orders that are on a hold, something like that.
Right. RPA does best when it's a highly repeatable process, very transactional in nature, and not a lot of exceptions. In fact, in some research that we had done, I've lost track of what year it is thanks to the pandemic. I think it was 2021, but it may have been 2020. We looked at the number of bots that folks have just in procurement alone. And what we saw is when you got too many, performance started to degrade and their metrics started to go in the wrong direction. So it's about being making good use of where you deploy which technologies that really can make the difference. And so one of the things, as Nick kind of mentioned, from when that order is received all the way through, there's opportunities to streamline some of the system linkages here. And we looked at, surprisingly, how organizations are still doing manual order entry. We found that 40% of our respondents are allowing that to happen. Now, I will say that they had an option to select all on this question that applied. And so they may be switching between automated and manual processes, depending on the order type. But every order that gets entered manually is an opportunity for error to creep into the system. It's an opportunity for, just even a minor typo, which then can make a company delivery address invalid. A customer address may be wrong. It may no longer match the rest of your master data if it's all being done manually as opposed to in an automated fashion. And again, the impact here is speed and transparency. Now, we then looked at the outcomes for companies based on whether or not they were using some of these more automated processes, like having that middle bucket there where data is entries are automatically flowing from your system, your CRM or your sales and quoting tool into the rest of the process. And what we saw is that those who have that approach, where their ERP system is automatically getting these orders fed to it, they have better days sales outstanding, and they have a better percentage for OTIF, the on time in full order delivery measure that many companies are looking at. So again, there is an impact on your corporate outcomes for doing a better job here on streamlining your order entry process.
Great point, Marisa. Excuse me. I think the one thing that we wanted to make sure that we hit on here is that it's not a one size fits all process, right? I mean, I think it depends on, how the way one company broke it down to me was they said, well, we look at our customer segmentation on kind of a matrix, on how captive they are and how important they are. That was the matrix, meaning if they were highly strategic and very captive, they had a tight partnership, well, maybe it's worth us investing quite a bit more resources with them for EDI connectivity, whereas if we have a strategic but not very captive customer, maybe a distributor that's ordering a high volume but has thousands of different OEM manufacturers they work with, maybe we need a tool to automate the orders that they are sending us, and what's most convenient for them. We want their business ultimately. And then finally, you've got the customers that are not very important, but highly captive. Thinking a lot of the mom and pop shops, smaller customers. We see e-commerce initiatives bode really well with those types of folks because they're getting more access to data, and you have kind of the leverage to say, we can offer you a better experience if you order via this channel. So I think that was one example that we heard from a company recently, and it kind of clicked with me, is that we're segmenting our customers and then pairing that digital ordering strategy with wherever they fall in that captive importance matrix.
Very cool. Very cool. And I think that ties into the fact that our customers really are expecting their business transactions to be, as we said earlier, in line with their personal experiences. And APQC's research partner, the Digital Supply Chain Institute, talks about having a front side flip to focus your internal processes on your customer. And the reality is becoming that having real-time visibility into changes in your order status and your shipment is becoming table stakes. In other words, you have to have that to play at the table, to be part of the game. And where we see it working well is when companies start by enabling their internal stakeholders. I'll talk a little more about this in a minute, and then extending out to their customers. Nick, what are you seeing here?
Yeah, I think this makes a ton of sense for giving sales reps and other supply chain analysts the ability to resolve customer inquiries themselves. Instead of emailing customer service, what's the status on this order? Giving them the tools that they need, maybe while they're out in the field, while they're with the customer, to be able to proactively manage or address customer concerns.
Yeah, and I think, we hear that companies are now competing based on the ease of doing business with them. So this directly impacts your customer experience, and that customer experience can then turn into a sustainable competitive advantage, right? So to put a little bit of data here around this, we looked at how are organizations doing when giving their internal stakeholders, not just sales, but also manufacturing, logistics, finance, all your internal functions that touch a customer order. How are they doing with giving them visibility here? So what we see in more than 2/3 of our participants is that sales teams do have visibility into the status of orders, either through a web portal or push notifications or both. But still, 1/3 of organizations are doing this manually. As Nick just described, that can tie up your sellers with a lot of back and forth emails and pinging people and waiting for a response. And that can slow things down for your customers' experience. And again, we see that having better internal transparency leads to better outcomes. Sales teams that can access real-time information are those companies where that's the case. They have a faster order to cash cycle time, 3 days faster, and that could be significant. This increased visibility also, as Nick said, can enable greater accountability and can highlight and maybe help reduce potential bottlenecks that you may have in the process. And when you're given that kind of anytime, anywhere access to the status of customer orders, then hopefully those employees who are able to see that can help resolve questions and issues more quickly. So yeah, so this is where we're seeing that it makes a difference, and there's still a lot of room for improvement for companies out there to give this visibility to the internal players. Is there anything you would want to add on this particular thing, Nick?
I thought that was spot on. I think your previous point around companies seeing CX as a competitive advantage is something that we're hearing more and more. Measuring that competitive advantage through customer retention, revenue retention, and then revenue expansion in their existing customer accounts. So instead of the touchy-feely, we love promoting customer experience. No, there's a bottom line impact, and here's how we can measure it.
Very good. And then the next logical extension after you've improved visibility internally is to extend that to your customers. We would caution against doing it in the opposite order, because you don't want your customers to see things that your own employees can't. That would just not be a good situation. So here we see that almost 6 out of 10 do enable customers with information on order status through either web portals or push notifications or both. This percentage is lower than it was for internal visibility. And again, that makes sense as organizations start internally and then only extend that to customers once it's been proven. And again, as before, we see better outcomes among those organizations that are giving customers this increased visibility. We see a better days sales outstanding, and that means that your organization can collect your cash more quickly, and probably because the customer could see where their order was all the way along, they're going to pay on time because they felt a part of that process. And we also see a better overall order to cash cycle time here. And so we do see proof, though, that increased customer visibility does bring your customers into a closer partnership, which ideally should also yield fewer issues related to invoicing and payment. And eventually the organization should be able to even anticipate their customers' desires, as well as giving them more transparency. So just any comments, Nick, on customer visibility?
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point with, I think sometimes people work out the kinks as well with an internal rollout before they roll out a portal to a customer or a mobile application for customers to track their own orders. But the other thing too is that like the ERP systems tend to be really good at issuing transactions, order acknowledgement, order confirmation, maybe even advanced shipping notice. And with traditionally manual order channels, we don't see companies that are offering that. If a customer is ordering via PDF, yeah, we've got it for our EDI customers, but we don't have it for our manual customers. So we're even trying to enable that. I mean, that's a big journey, and I don't know where that would fall here, maybe on the alerts or updates, but even extending those alerts or updates to what were previously or historically manual channels seems to be a push as well.
Very cool. Very nice. So looking forward to the future, companies are planning to make improvements in this space. And we're reassured to see that the number one improvement is improving that underlying master data, the quality and the management of it, and ensuring that that oil, if you will, continues to flow. And then also we see that in addition to that, there are plans to add automation and enable more seamless transitions, the front end integration, if you will, so that from sales into order to cash. And then organizations are increasingly moving to this notion of an end-to-end order to cash process. Historically, we saw a lot of functional silos in companies, and now increasingly we're seeing horizontal end-to-end processes like order to cash, procure to pay, and some of those. And then again, there's definitely a move toward increasing the real-time visibility for orders and shipments. Now, one thing that's not on the slide, because it wasn't one of the top 5, is improving governance. And I hadn't mentioned this previously, but one of the critical performance drivers for a successful order to cash process is having strong process governance, ideally a global end-to-end process owner that has a holistic view of this whole thing and can see where the gaps and the breakdowns and the bottlenecks are occurring so that they can then improve it on an ongoing basis. So that really helps along with fixing your data and then adding some automation.
The end-to-end process is huge, right? I think companies are more holistically looking at even order entry, right? You look at order entry errors might be compiling downstream in invoicing. And once customers aren't able to do their matching on their side, maybe that's cash that's outstanding, that's not getting paid on time, impacting DSO. So now we're seeing kind of this merger of finance and customer service having a vested interest in both of these things. And even things like claims management, when a customer issues a return or starts a new claim with customer service, automating the transaction that spans between, finance and issuing some sort of credit is another blending of those two departments as well.
Yeah. Increasingly, we're seeing that more and more that's the case. And it helps to really, avoid or remove some of that kind of finger pointing, like, where was the problem? Oh, it was their fault.
Totally.
That was their fault, when you've got this seamless end-to-end process. So one of the things we looked at also is, why are people looking to improve their process here? What are they trying to accomplish? And the biggest benefit is improved efficiency. And we were shocked when we asked people to rate the efficiency of their current process. Only 4% rated it very highly. Like, people are not happy with how these processes are functioning. Some of that is the consequence of all these disruptions that are preventing things from being in the ideal state, but also there is definitely a need for improved efficiency in terms of speed and quality. And then customer satisfaction came up third. And I think that's also a consequence of companies in many cases shifted into survival mode the last couple of years. So it was about cost reduction and just hanging on to having tomorrow. But I think increasingly they're recognizing that they've got to tie the customers back into this, or there won't be any.
Yeah, and it's hard to increase customer satisfaction, I think, when a lot of companies that we work with are looking to free up their customer service team so they can do things like voice of customer surveys to see what customers are demanding in a better experience. And it's hard to do that, like you said, when everyone is just trying to keep their head above water.
Yeah. Eliminating the busy work, enabling more deep work and socially collaborative activities, definitely important. And Nick, I liked your formula that you mentioned earlier. If you could recap that for me so I get it straight in my head. It was something about EX and CX. And
yes, no, this is gold. I heard this at a recent customer service and experience trade show, and it was around the discussion of, how are we positioning improvements and investments that enhance the customer experience. And the formula they shared was EX, employee experience, plus CX, customer experience, equals RX, revenue change and revenue impacts through retention and growth. And the idea was that if you are reducing the administrative burden on your employees, they will be more engaged. They will stay longer. You'll have more talented folks that are then working with customers and impacting the customer experience. When those two come together and you see improvements in EX with more engaged employees and improved customer satisfaction scores, that's when you're seeing that revenue impact on retention and expansion. So that it's not mine. I just thought it was gold.
That is, I like it. So to sort of wrap up a couple key takeaways here, right? So the order to cash process and order management can be improved with a couple of known best practices: end-to-end process ownership, standardized processes, common goals and measures, so that you don't have these silos in your organization impeding your ability to serve your customer. And then visibility and transparency, both for your sellers, your sales folks, and your customers. And we cannot overemphasize the need for high quality master data, and that increasing your automation is a differentiator because of that impact on the customer experience. So as I mentioned earlier, I do have links to some of these reports that I've been referencing, and they everyone can take a look at those. But now I want to turn it over to Nick to talk to us about an Esker client case study.
Awesome. Thanks, Marisa. And it's a lot of what we've been talking about. And I think this slide, does it all, right? I mean, we're in this canyon of supply chain disruptions, and we're walking this tightrope between quality of service and cost to serve, meaning we want to have the best customer experience possible, but we have to do so at realistic, within realistic constraints of people and of money, of course. And so I think that's the ecosystem that a lot of the folks that are reaching out to us are kind of walking in day to day. And I wanted to share the story of a manufacturer of packaging related equipment and supplies. They've seen their business drastically increase with the rise of e-commerce. There are so much more online shopping that have demanded packaging materials that they've seen their business drastically increase over the past couple of years, especially. And their kind of goal that they came to us with was, we're trying to transform the DNA of our customer care team through offloading as much busy work as humanly possible on them, which in turn will help us improve our customers' overall experience. Now, what specific challenges did they have? They had a ton of customers that weren't very tech savvy, that were still continuing to issue orders manually via fax, via email, or even super tech savvy customers that had their orders out there on their own customer facing portal like Ariba. Those customers typically said, if you want our orders, come and get them. And what it was leading to was a lot of tedious, busy work in customer care. Now, they also had ancillary challenges, things like a high volume of inquiries. Back to your very first slide, Marisa, where people are saying, where's my order? And in turn, that increase in administrative burden to answer those questions was impacting the bandwidth that they had to spend elsewhere. Now, they also had really interesting things around customer inquiries as well, with the importance of email management, because they had some customers that were asking for proof of delivery, and they found a loophole to not have to make payments on time if they didn't have proof of delivery. Now, I'm kind of making it seem a little bit more malicious than maybe it was, but these are it's a real world case study in the fact that customer service processes and downstream finance processes are totally intertwined, ultimately impacting big metrics like DSO. So what we ended up doing together was deploying an AI-based platform in customer services. What that was doing was automating a lot of the transactional work, things like automating order entry, returns orders, credits, things like that, along with an email management system on the front end, using AI to prioritize and route emails properly and link them up with the appropriate transactions. And what that gave them was a really strong audit trail of everything that they were doing, and it improved customer service efficiency by about 60% on the time that they were spending on administrative tasks. So that was kind of the what ended up happening. I think for a lot of folks, the business case was important too. Like, right, if you're in those shoes and you're like, well, I see it, but I'm not sure how to get funding for something like this. And that was where I think these guys were the strongest, because they measured the business case not only in labor or FTE reallocation, they said, okay, we can save about 15 full-time equivalent CSRs. And we can refocus them. It's not just about cost avoidance on those CSRs. It's what could we do if, with those 15 people in our business, cross-selling and upselling, proactive customer experience initiatives. Now, they also looked at things like write-offs and returns for things that were due to order entry errors. So they looked at, what were our annual write-offs last year due to order entry errors by using and taking human data entry out of the equation. We could easily see reductions of 80% there. They also looked at, which I thought was really interesting, the speed to ramping up a new hire. So it took them about 6 months to have somebody fully proficient that was on their own, being able to manage orders and inquiries. And if they were able to get that down to, say, 1 month, they were getting 5 months more value of that customer service rep, and with, 8 new hires last year alone, that ended up to be significant savings as well. Not to mention, at the end of this, they were focused on giving their customers a better experience, and the customers were reaching out to them saying, guys, we need more from you. Otherwise, we're gonna, your products are great, but we need the service to match. So that was their world. Maybe it's relevant. Maybe there's something in there. If it is, obviously we'd love to have a chat with you guys.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Sounds like they made some really interesting improvements, got some real value out of that.
Transformational project for sure. And it's cool to be able to see those things come together, and especially employees that are able to say that, hey, I really am enjoying what I'm doing so much more than I used to.
Excellent, excellent. Well, so now we have time for some questions from the audience. First question, Nick, that I'm going to give you here is, my organization today has almost no automation for order management. How do we get started?
Great question. We do this internally for problems that aren't order entry, but process mapping to understand where in our process is there the most inefficiency. And I think people start, bottom up, you know what I mean, in terms of low hanging fruit and the easiest things to solve. And one of the biggest challenges to solve is increasing your digital ordering percentage. And I think that's something that we see a lot of companies start with is, let's get digital on our order creation, and then we will focus on some things like, self-service tools and kind of grow up from there.
Great, great. So now we have a question that came in that says, where would ERP fall under automatic maturity scale? Oh, so the automation maturity scale, and this company uses SAP in their facilities. You want to address that?
Give it a shot. I think, what we hear companies say is SAP is a great system of truth. For those that have been on SAP a long time, those are the ones that we see a little bit more maturity in terms of looking to maximize that investment by automating the transactions that go into it, or filling in some of the gaps that may exist, like self-service tools, things like that. I think, for companies that, had a chat with a company today that had gone from an AS400 green screen type ERP system to SAP S4HANA. Now for them, that was transformational. They had a brand new system of truth, yet they still had quite a bit of opportunity where they got SAP S4HANA in place. They got better data, but they're like continuously looking for where they can improve it. So I think, for them, they saw it as just the start, but kind of that brick foundation from where they want to automate going further.
Okay, thank you. So here is a question we have. What is some reporting or metrics we should run before and after we automate, just to make sure that we're on track?
Good question. I think we see folks typically measure digital ordering percentage, for automated transactions, processing time. One interesting one we heard this week was speed to warehouse availability. So everything from the time an order comes in, the customer hits send, whatever channel that is, to when warehouse has the visibility in order to fulfill that order. They deal with a lot of rush shipments, so that was a really important metric to them. and then some of your success criteria metrics. Was there a reduction in order entry errors? Was there a reduction in FTEs? I think those are, we spend a lot of time with folks prior to a project in order to define those things and make sure that we're hitting those during the implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can chime in from APQC
Please.
perspective. So I agree with what you just said. And we tend to think of measures in buckets. So you want to have some measures that look at cost and cost savings, cost avoidance, cost improvement from your order automation, let's say. Then we look at productivity measures. So what were some of the gains that you may have had there? We look at cycle time, especially externally, client facing, or their order cycle time that the customer experiences, as well as some of these critical internal cycle time measures that are helpful. And then we look at efficiency. So how many FTEs do you need, or full-time equivalent employees, for different processes within this overall end-to-end process? And a quality measure or two is important as well. Like you mentioned, defects due to manual interventions. So we see that, companies are increasingly measuring touchless orders, for example, where from the beginning to the end, there's not fingers touching it along the way before it's fulfilled. So looking at those, kind of making sure you take a balanced perspective, because where we've seen challenges is when companies focus solely on speed, cost can get out of control. If you're focusing solely on cost, you may sacrifice that customer experience. Again, high quality is critical, but there are sometimes those trade-offs and balancing measures. So an important balance that needs to be struck.
Great point.
I think we're going to have to stop there with questions. There were a few others that came in, and I'll make sure we respond to you guys via email. But I just want to make sure that we provide you with contact information for both Nick and for me, if you have any continuing questions or additional feedback or thoughts that you'd like to share with us. And then I have a few reminders. Everyone will receive a copy of the slides and the recording within 2 business days. And would like to ask if you could take our webinar satisfaction survey when the webinar closes. Continuous improvement, we always like to know what you thought. And then APQC has a website where you can go learn about our upcoming webinars and events, and also those that have recently passed. And in fact, Nick, I think you've got an event coming up, don't you?
Yeah, we do. Thanks for the reminder. If you're interested in continuing this conversation, of course, APQC, we love your content, been partnered with you guys for many years. We're also hosting an internal webinar that you can check out on Esker under our webinars page. It's a virtual event featuring a leader in the manufacturing of lubricants and their digital transformation journey as it relates to order management. So good stuff. We hope to see you guys there.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We want to encourage you to follow us on social media if you don't already. And I want to really thank you, Nick, and your team at Esker for sponsoring our webinar and sharing your thoughts.
Hey, our pleasure. Thanks for having us. Great to work with you.
Thank you. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.